Thomas was 32, and he was looking for something more. Not money, not fame. Something that could fill the emptiness that had settled in his life after a series of unsuccessful attempts to find himself. A few years at university that brought no satisfaction. A job as an office clerk that drained his soul. Fleeting relationships that crumbled like sand. He had always loved the sea, but it was the love of a city dweller, admiring it from afar, breathing the salty air on vacation, reading books about distant voyages. Now he decided to take a step towards this love. He bought a small sailboat, old but reliable, naming it Dream. He poured all his savings into it and spent several months learning the basics of navigation, reading about sails, knots, safety at sea. His experience was minimal, his enthusiasm maximal. He planned a simple trip along the coast of Florida, from Fort Lauderdale south to the Florida Keys and then back. It was meant to be a test of himself, his dream, and his resolve. The first few days were perfect. Bright sun, a gentle breeze, calm seas. Thomas felt truly alive for the first time in years. Sailing proved to be challenging, requiring constant attention and physical effort, but it was exactly the kind of effort that gave a sense of purpose. He saw other sailors, small islands drifting by, heard the cries of seagulls. His world had narrowed to the size of his yacht and the boundless ocean around him. On the third day of the voyage, when he was somewhere southwest of the coast, far from shore to avoid busy shipping lanes, the sky began to change. Rapidly, dark gray clouds that had seemed weightless moments ago now took on a threatening, heavy form. The wind, which had been a gentle breath, suddenly turned into a powerful, ominous gust. Thomas, with his limited experience, didn't immediately grasp the full seriousness of the situation. He had checked the weather forecast before setting off, and nothing like this was predicted. But the sea is an element that doesn't always follow forecasts. The storm hit suddenly and with fury. The wind howled like a raging beast. Waves rose to the sky, crashing against the side of the yacht with such force that it seemed about to break apart. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the world around him into a milky gray chaos. Visibility dropped almost to zero. Thomas fought. He tried to reef the sails, keep the yacht on course, shouting something to himself, trying to drown out the fear that was growing inside. Salty spray mixed with rain and tears of despair and the realization of his own helplessness in the face of such power. A wave, larger than the others, engulfed the yacht. Thomas was thrown onto the deck, hitting his head on a winch. For a few seconds, he lost consciousness. When he came to, the yacht was on its side, the mast was broken, and water was flooding the cockpit. Most importantly, the navigation equipment, his radio, his GPS, everything was either washed overboard or destroyed by the water. He was alone, in the middle of the roaring ocean, on a damaged yacht, without the ability to determine his location or call for help. The panic he had previously suppressed exploded. It was cold and paralyzing. The storm lasted for several more hours, gradually subsiding, but leaving behind utter devastation. Dream was still afloat, but it was no longer a sailboat, just a broken boat drifting aimlessly on the waves. As the sky began to clear, Thomas looked around. Around him, only the ocean. Endless, gray, with heavy swells. No shore, no ship on the horizon. He tried to start the engine. No use, water had gotten into the system. His only life raft was damaged. Food and fresh water supplies would last a few days if he was very careful. He was lost. Truly, hopelessly lost. The wreckage of his dream drifted with the current, moving away from shore. The silence that followed the roar of the storm was even more terrifying. It was the silence of the ocean that had swallowed him. He sat on the deck, soaked to the bone, with a headache and emptiness inside. His little journey for something more had turned into a struggle for survival for which he was completely unprepared. The first day of drifting passed. The sun came out again, and now its rays were not gentle, but cruel. They scorched his skin, reflected off the water's surface, blinding his eyes. Thomas had under the miraculously surviving awning, trying to conserve his last reserves of fresh water. He ate a piece of dry biscuit. It tasted like sawdust, but his stomach demanded something. Fear gave way to a strange apathy, interspersed with sharp attacks of panic. Every wave that hit the side seemed like the ocean's attempt to finally swallow him. Every cloud on the horizon seemed like the outline of a rescue ship that then dissolved. He tried to do things. Bailing water from the cockpit, checking what remained on board, trying to fix the radio in vain. It helped prevent him from going crazy. But night fell, and with the darkness came the loneliness. The night sky over the ocean was incredible, billions of stars, The Milky Way stretched overhead. But this beauty was indifferent. It only emphasized his insignificance in this vast, empty world. On the second day of drifting, the water began to run out. His lips cracked, his throat was dry. His thoughts became confused. He remembered his past life, a meaningless job, unimportant conversations. How ironic that in the very search for something more, he found himself in a situation where more simply didn't exist, just him and the ocean. He started talking to himself, or to the yacht, or to the seagulls that sometimes flew by, looking indifferently at him with their bead-like eyes. He told them about his life, about how it should have been. On the third day, weakness set in. He could barely move. The sun was relentless. He was delirious. He saw oases in the middle of the ocean, ships sailing directly towards him, only to dissolve into the air. The worst, he started seeing the faces of people he had loved, or those he had once known. They looked at him with pity or reproach. The despair was so deep that it felt as if he wasn't just drifting anymore, but sinking, slowly submerging into a cold abyss. Hope had faded. He was just waiting for the end. He didn't know what kind, from dehydration, from sharks that could appear at any moment, from a new storm. He barely had the strength to even think. His body felt heavy, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He lay under the awning, watching the reflection of the sun on the water shimmering before his eyes. It felt like the end of a meaningless life that was concluding in complete solitude amidst an indifferent element. He closed his eyes, felt his consciousness slowly retreating. It wasn't scary. It was liberation. Liberation from the pain, from the fear, from the search for that something more that had led him here. He was ready to give up. In a state of semi-consciousness, Thomas felt something nearby, some movement in the water. At first, he thought it was a shark. His heart seemed to stop, and then it beat with renewed force, despite his weakness. He forced his eyes open. A back appeared above the surface of the water. Smooth, gray, wet. Then, a spout of water. And then the back again. Not a shark. It was a dolphin. Thomas watched, not believing his eyes. Was this a hallucination? Another illusion created by his dehydrated brain? The dolphin swam closer to the yacht, circling carefully around it. It surfaced right nearby, and Thomas saw its snout, long, with the characteristic smile, and its eyes. Large, dark eyes that looked directly at him with an unusual, intelligent curiosity. The dolphin made a sound, something like clicks and whistles. Then it submerged again and surfaced on the other side. It wasn't acting like a casual visitor, but like someone examining him. Thomas tried to move his hand, to call out, but only a hoarse groan escaped his throat. The dolphin seemed to hear. It swam even closer, almost touching the side of the yacht. Thomas could make out a scar on its side, a thin, white line, like an old cut. It was a sign that it was real, not a vision. A real, living dolphin. Hope, which had almost faded, flared up with renewed strength. A tiny spark in complete darkness. A dolphin. What was it doing here? Could it help? The dolphin seemed to understand that it had caught Thomas's attention. It stopped just circling. It started moving in a specific direction, swimming a short distance away, then stopping, as if waiting. Then it would return to the yacht, make its sounds again, and again swim in the same direction. It looked as if it was trying to beckon him somewhere, trying to show him the way. Thomas was amazed. He had heard stories about the intelligence of dolphins, but he never thought something like this could happen to him. Gathering his last strength, he tried to sit up. It was difficult. Every muscle ached. His head was spinning. He sat on the deck, back against the cabin. The dolphin swam up to the side again, and Thomas was able to reach out his hand. He gently ran his palm over its smooth, firm skin. It was cool and silky. "Hello," Thomas whispered. The dolphin gave a quiet whistle in response, as if greeting him. It was an incredible moment. A moment of connection with another living being in the middle of the deserted ocean. The dolphin, which Thomas mentally named Kai, the name somehow associated with the ocean and hope, swam a few meters away again and demonstrated movement in the direction it had already shown. It was as if it was saying, "Follow me." Thomas understood the complete absurdity of the situation. A dolphin leading a broken yacht. But he had no other choice. There was almost no hope of rescue left. Perhaps this was his only chance, or the last hallucination before the end. But hope, however tiny, was sweeter than despair. He didn't know how to make the yacht move in the right direction without sails and the engine. But the current and the wind, though weak, were still present. Perhaps Kai could guide him. Kai was incredibly persistent. He swam ahead, returning from time to time to check if Thomas was moving. If the yacht drifted sideways, he would swim up to the side and gently nudge it with his nose, trying to change direction. This required significant effort from him, and Thomas understood that. He saw the dolphin's muscles strain. It was a slow, exhausting movement. Hours dissolved into this monotonous rhythm. Following Kai, his return, the quiet nudging of the hull. Thomas sat on deck, watching the dolphin's gray back occasionally surface. Kai became his only point of reference, his only guide. The sun began to dip towards the horizon. Thomas felt his strength draining away. Dehydration was taking its toll. But Kai's presence, his constant, persistent help, it was incredible. It gave him the strength to keep going, to hold on, not to give up. As the sky turned orange and pink, Kai began to show more activity. He became faster, his movements more decisive. He swam further away, then returned at speed, leaping out of the water, as if trying to draw attention to something ahead. Thomas struggled to lift his head, and he saw on the horizon a dark line. Faint at first, barely visible. But it didn't disappear like a mirage. It became clearer. It was the shore. Tears streamed down his cheeks, mixing with the salt water. It wasn't pain, but relief. Hope had become reality. Kai was leading him home. The last few hours were the hardest. The yacht moved incredibly slowly. Kai continued on his way, swimming up to Thomas from time to time, as if encouraging him. Thomas felt he was at his limit. But the thought that the shore was close, that he was being led by this amazing dolphin, gave him superhuman strength. He could now make out trees on the shore, some buildings. The yacht entered shallower waters. Kai swam alongside, no longer pushing the yacht, but simply accompanying it, as if guarding it. And then he saw a boat. A small fishing boat anchored nearby. Thomas gathered his last strength and tried to shout, to wave. His voice was weak, but perhaps his hand movement was noticed. Two men were looking at him from the boat. Their faces showed surprise, then shock. They quickly raised the anchor and motored towards him. When the fishing boat came closer, Thomas saw their concerned faces. One of the men, older, with a weathered face, shouted, "Son, how did you end up out here?" Thomas couldn't answer. He just pointed towards Kai, who was still nearby, slowly circling the yacht. The fishermen also saw the dolphin. They looked at it with astonishment. Kai, as if understanding that his mission was complete, made a final, graceful circle around the yacht, surfaced near Thomas, and let out a farewell whistle. Then, with a single swift movement, he submerged and swam out into the open ocean. Thomas watched his rescuer disappear. The feeling of gratitude was so strong it took his breath away. The fishermen helped him climb onto their boat. One of them immediately gave him a bottle of water. It was the best water he had ever tasted. "The dolphin, he led you?" asked the younger fisherman, still looking where Kai had vanished. Thomas barely nodded, unable to utter a word. He had been saved. Saved thanks to an amazing, inexplicable creature from the depths. He was taken to the nearest Coast Guard station, and from there to the hospital. Thomas was severely dehydrated and exhausted, but, miraculously, without serious injuries, except for the blow to his head and sunburn. He spent several days under the doctor's care, regaining his strength. The story of the dolphin rescuer elicited various reactions. Doctors and nurses listened with wonder but attributed some of it to the effects of stress and dehydration. The fishermen who found him confirmed they had seen the dolphin near his broken yacht, which added credibility to his story. Journalists who learned about the unusual rescue tried to get interviews, but Thomas was still too weak and emotionally drained. He lay in the hospital room, looking out the window, and thought only of Kai, of his eyes, of his persistence, of the scar on his side. This wasn't just a dolphin. This was a creature that had seen his plight and decided to help. Without reason, without gain. Just like that. It was something incredible, something that went beyond his understanding of the world. After being discharged from the hospital, Thomas returned to his empty life. But now the emptiness was different. It was filled with gratitude and a question. A big, important question. Why did Kai do it? And what was he, Thomas, supposed to do with this second chance at life? He began to search for information about dolphins. He read scientific articles, books about marine mammals, watched documentaries. He learned about their incredible intelligence, complex social structure, ability for empathy. Stories about dolphins helping humans turned out not to be so rare. But his story, it was personal. This was his dolphin, his Kai. The more he learned about dolphins, the more he learned about the ocean, about its vastness, its importance to the planet, its fragility, and about the threats. This information was a shock to him. He, who had always loved the sea, had never thought about what was happening beneath the surface. He learned about plastic pollution choking marine creatures, about overfishing devastating ocean ecosystems, about the destruction of coral reefs, about chemical waste poisoning the water, about how noise from ships and underwater explosions harm dolphins and whales, disrupting their communication and navigation. Every piece of new information about threats to marine life felt like a blow, as if someone was hurting his rescuer. Kai lived in this world, a world that humans, including Thomas himself with his former indifference, were slowly destroying. His gratitude towards Kai began to grow into something more, into a sense of responsibility. This amazing creature had saved his life. Now he felt he had to reciprocate, to do something for Kai, for his family, for his home, the ocean. It was a revelation. The moment when the search for something more finally made sense. Here it was. That something more was not in himself, not in the selfish pursuit of adventure or happiness. It was in the connection with this vast, living world and in the desire to protect it. The first steps were cautious. He started changing his habits, gave up single-use plastic, sorted his trash, started conserving water. It seemed minuscule, but it was a start. Then he began looking for organizations working on marine conservation. He contacted several local groups in Florida that dealt with beach cleanups and rescuing marine animals. His story about the dolphin sparked interest, but he didn't want to be just the guy the dolphins saved. He wanted to be useful. He started volunteering. He went out to beaches to pick up trash. He helped monitor sea turtle populations. He learned to recognize signs of illness or injury in marine creatures. It was hard work, often thankless, but it gave him a sense of belonging, a feeling that he was doing something important, doing it for Kai. His former life seemed distant and unimportant. The office, the routine, none of it mattered anymore. His passion was here, on the shore of the ocean, in the fight for its future. The transition from volunteering to full-fledged passion was gradual but inevitable. The more Thomas immersed himself in the world of marine conservation, the stronger his desire to act became. He understood that simply cleaning beaches was only a small part of the problem. Systemic changes were needed. It needed to be talked about. Others needed to be involved. He started attending lectures and seminars on marine biology and ecology. His formal education was in another field, but he greedily absorbed new knowledge. He learned about the complex interconnections in ocean ecosystems, the role of each species, how human activity affects this fragile balance. His enthusiasm was genuine and deep. He met scientists, ecologists, other activists. His story of rescue always evoked emotion, but he learned to use it not for personal fame, but as a way to draw attention to the problem. The ocean gave me a second chance through one of its amazing creatures, he would say in his first small public appearances. Now I'm giving my time and energy to give the ocean a chance to survive. Thomas decided to go beyond just volunteering. He enrolled in local university evening courses related to marine ecology. The studies were challenging, but he was motivated as never before. He wanted to understand the problem at a deep level to be more effective in his activities. Parallel to his studies, he began participating in larger projects. He joined campaigns against the use of single-use plastic in his city. Together with other activists, he wrote petitions to local authorities, participated in peaceful demonstrations. He, a former quiet office worker, was now not afraid to speak in front of people, talk about pressing issues, defend his beliefs. He also began to engage in environmental education. He gave free lectures to school children, telling them about the importance of the ocean, about dolphins and other marine inhabitants, about how everyone could help. He used his knowledge, his experience, and his passion to ignite a spark of interest in others. The children listened to him with enthusiasm, especially when he told them about his dolphin rescuer. Thomas realized that one of the most effective ways to help was monitoring and collecting data. He joined a program for monitoring dolphins in their natural habitat. Now he spent hours at sea, but on a different boat, with scientific equipment, photographing dolphins, identifying them by scars and fins, recording their behavior and the state of the environment. Every time he saw a dolphin with a scar on its side, his heart would skip a beat. What if it was Kai? He was never sure, but the possibility itself inspired him. He learned to work with photographs, enter data into databases, analyze information. His former analytical skills, which seemed useless in the office, now came in handy. He became a valuable team member, combining a scientific approach with deep personal motivation. His home gradually turned into headquarters. Books on marine biology piled up, maps of ocean currents hung on the walls. The table was covered with monitoring data papers and action plans. He worked 7 days a week, tirelessly. His passion fueled him. He started writing articles, first for local environmental newsletters, then for more serious publications. He wrote about pollution problems, about the importance of protected areas, about the need to change people's attitude towards the ocean. His voice became more confident, his arguments more convincing. His family and friends were initially surprised by his sudden change, but they saw how happy he was, how meaningful his life had become. They started supporting him. Some helped at events, some donated funds, some simply listened to his enthusiastic stories about dolphins. Thomas understood that the rescue by the dolphin was not the end of his story, but the beginning of a new life dedicated to a greater purpose. He was no longer looking for something more for himself. He had found that something more in serving something vast, important, and vulnerable, the ocean and its inhabitants. His passion for marine conservation had ignited and burned with a bright, unquenchable flame. Years passed. Thomas became a well-known figure in Florida's marine conservation circles. His story of the dolphin who saved his life became a legend, which he told again and again, but always with one goal: not to elicit admiration for himself, but to draw attention to the state of the ocean. He founded his own nonprofit organization, Call of the Deep, naming it after the internal call that had changed his life. The organization focused on several areas: coastal and underwater cleanup, monitoring and research of dolphin and whale populations, educational programs for schools and the public, and lobbying for legislative changes to protect the marine environment. His days were long and busy. He spent time at sea, participating in monitoring expeditions. He scuba dived, clearing trash from the seabed. He spoke at conferences and in schools. He met with politicians and business representatives, convincing them of the need for environmental initiatives. He wrote grant applications to support his organization. There were successes and there were setbacks. There were small victories: a beach cleared of plastic, a rescued sea turtle, a local law passed banning certain types of single-use plastic. And there were disappointments: the indifference of officials, resistance from businesses, the endless flow of new trash into the ocean. But Thomas never gave up. The memory of Kai, of his eyes, of his saving movement, was his inexhaustible source of strength. Dolphin monitoring became one of his favorite activities. He spent hundreds of hours on boats, observing these amazing creatures. He saw them hunt, play, teach their young. He learned to distinguish individual dolphins by their fins, by the scars on their bodies. A scar on the side always drew his special attention. One day, many years after his rescue, during another monitoring expedition, he saw him. A dolphin with a familiar scar on its side. He was a little older, perhaps with new scars, but Thomas was almost certain it was him. Kai. The dolphin swam up to their boat, circled nearby, looking at the people on board. His eyes were as intelligent and deep as Thomas remembered them. Thomas leaned over the side. "Kai," he whispered. The dolphin let out a quiet whistle, as if recognizing him. Then, to the surprise of everyone on the boat, it performed a few graceful leaps right by the side, as if greeting him. Thomas felt tears streaming down his cheeks. This was a reunion, not necessarily full awareness on the dolphin's part, but for Thomas, it was a sign that he was moving in the right direction. A sign of gratitude from the ocean. Kai swam away again, joining his group, and they swam off into the distance. Thomas watched them go with a deep sense of peace and purpose. His life was now entirely dedicated to the ocean. He didn't have a lot of money, his work was hard, but he was truly happy. The emptiness that had once been inside him had completely disappeared. It was filled with meaning, connection, and passion. He wrote a book about his story, not as a heroic deed, but as an illustration of the connection between humans and nature, how one amazing creature can change a whole life, and how one person can try to repay a debt of gratitude to an entire ocean. His organization, Call of the Deep, grew, attracting more and more volunteers and supporters. They conducted large-scale campaigns, influenced political decisions, rescued animals. Thomas realized that his rescue wasn't just a miracle. It was a gift that opened his eyes to the beauty, majesty, and vulnerability of a world he had only vaguely known existed before. The dolphin Kai didn't just save his life. He showed him how to find the purpose of that life. He often came to the ocean shore, sat on the sand, and watched the waves. He listened to the sound of the surf, the cries of the birds, felt the salty wind on his face. This was his place of strength, the place where hope once seemed lost, and then a rescuer emerged from the deep. His passion for marine conservation became his life. It wasn't a hobby, not a job. It was a calling. The call of the deep that he heard in a state of semi-consciousness drifting on the waves, and to which he responded with all his soul. Thomas's story became an inspiration to many. A story about how one unexpected miracle can change everything, and how a person, having found their purpose, can repay a debt of gratitude to the world that saved them. He lived his life, dedicating it to the ocean. Because it was there, in the boundless salt water, amidst the storm and despair, that he was saved. Saved by a creature that became for him a symbol of hope, intelligence, and the fragile beauty of the marine world. He was a lost sailor who found his true course thanks to a dolphin, and that course led him to protect those who live beneath the waves. As the sun set over the horizon, Thomas sat on the shore, watched the ocean, and smiled. He was no longer looking for something more. He was living that something more every day. In every rescued dolphin, in every clean beach, in every child who heard his story and wanted to help. He heard the call of the deep and answered it with all his soul.